Thank You Quartet. That was actually arranged by Andrew Dittman, our choir director back a few years ago, who loved to arrange music. Thank you so much. You know, when we have the young involved in worship, it gets kind of messy sometimes, doesn't it? But isn't it great that they feel comfortable to come up and be youthful? That's good. That's good. We need that youth, and we need that inspiration, and they need to learn from a very early age how to have faith, how to worship God. And, you know, some Presbyterians have a reputation as maybe not being so vibrant in worship. Well, we're breaking that at First Presbyterian. Well, today we're talking about prayer, and we've talked about it some this summer, throughout the summer, and we're going to continue to talk about it for the next month because we feel called by a church, as a church, to pray. Think about our deacons who started a parking lot prayer ministry. And when you go home and you go back, you'll see by the visitors parking some boxes there that you can put a prayer request in. And this is a ministry actually for Reed Middle School parents who love to park in our parking lot twice a day. And they have put prayer requests in there. And once a month we go out and we encourage them, and we want them to know that we will pray for them. And we're also initiating a citywide online prayer ministry, Duncanvilleprayer.com. If you look it up, the website is now up. It's not complete yet. It's going to be. Centro Familiar is also working with us to put it into Spanish. We have testimonies on there. We have a place for citizens of Duncanville, and anybody really. We're not limiting it, but we are focusing on Duncanville, to be able to have some place to go and put a prayer request and put their answer if they want to. Now, we're doing this because God desires for us to pray. Does God tell us that quite often in Scripture? Yes, that's God's will. And so we need individuals to pray, not just for themselves, but for their city and for their nation. And so that's what we're striving to do. And we're calling other churches to do this with us. And we found this work on, well, the Old Testament and the New Testament. So we're going to look at both Testaments, a little piece, today to ground ourselves in that. And so King Hezekiah was actually king of Judah, and he had been king for some decades. And he had a problem. He had developed a serious health issue that was going to result in his death if something didn't happen. So he had a history as king, and he was a man of faith. And so that was just natural for him to exercise faith. He had done that throughout his reign. It would be natural for him to pray because he had built up Judah by that very thing, by his faith. And here's some of the things he did. And I don't know if you read the one-year Bible, and very many of you read it, but this has been a reading just recently in 2 Chronicles. If you didn't, it's a good afternoon exercise to read 2 Chronicles chapters, about 29 or 28, all the way through 32, and you'll hear his story, and it's great. And so he was a man of faith, and he did what was right in God's eyes. Here's some of the things he did. He had destroyed all the false religious monuments throughout the land. You know how Israel, it says, there's a good king, then there's a bad king, and there's a good king, and there's a bad king. And the bad king would fill the land with different statues and different monuments to false gods. Well, he went through the land, and he destroyed all of those monuments. He also insisted that his people throw away their idols. He reopened the temple. Now, the temple was just a mess, and so he rebuilt the temple, reopened the temple. He reestablished, he called all the priests and the Levites back. He initiated worship. He made a covenant with the Lord, and he reestablished the festivals, and he reestablished worship. And then he called the people to bring their tithes and their offerings so that temple worship could be supported, because you have to support it for it to happen. And so then he called the nation to celebrate Passover after he'd done all this work. And he said, come, And here's how he said it. He was very direct. He said, "Do not be stubborn as your ancestors were." Can I talk to you guys like that sometimes? Now, do not be stubborn as your ancestors were. But probably I won't. "But submit yourselves to the Lord and come to his sanctuary. Serve the Lord your God so that his fierce anger will turn away from you." Now, Hezekiah knew something. He knew that prosperous life, the blessing of God, came when you honored God. And that a nation's prosperity depends on your faith in God. So, imagine the messengers, they go out and they're carrying this message throughout the land, and they're telling them this message, and the people just swarm to Jerusalem. No, the people just mocked them, laughed them to scorn. It had been so long. But there were a few who came. And then when those few came, then others started to come because Hezekiah prayed for his people. And he encouraged all the priests and all the Levites. The Levites were actual worship leaders. Dameron walked up to me this morning and said, "I'm a Levite." And I said, "I'm going to preach about you today." Because that was the worship staff, the worship leading staff with singers and musicians. And so as they all came, Hezekiah encouraged them. Because the sanctuary is probably empty at first. And you know, all pastors need encouragement about that. And so then they began bringing their offerings to the festival, and he just helped them feel good about that. And so they all went and they did this Passover festival, and it brought them so much joy to come back to worship, so much joy to be together, to be in the temple, to do what they were supposed to do, that it went for an extra week. Imagine a worship service that lasts for 2 weeks. Wouldn't that be great? Well, it felt very good to them. It was good to have faith back as a center of public life for them. And the people's offerings began to pile up more and more and more. They were able to pay their priests. They were able to paint their sanctuary. They were able to pay their Levites, their singers, their musicians, and they had enough left over to care for the poor. Enough left over to really make a difference in the community, to help the people. And there was great joy in Jerusalem because the leaders prayed, and God heard their prayers. God blessed them, and they committed their hearts to him. That's in 2 Chronicles 30:27. They committed their hearts to him because of Hezekiah's leadership. And he led by example. Scripture says of him, every work that he undertook in the service of the house of God and in accordance with the law and the commandments to seek his God, he did with all his heart, and he prospered. He lived his faith out publicly as a lifestyle. True faith is seeking God with all your heart in the work God has given you. Now, isn't that an interesting coupling? It's not like saying just sit in this church all the time. It's saying be out there and do the work you've been called to do. It's kind of like a purpose that you have. Do it in the Lord with all of your heart. That's what he says. That's what true faith is. And so then Hezekiah went on, and he had some enemies that came against him, the nation of Assyria, but he did not break his method of prayer, and he defeated the enemies. And the Lord saw him through. So when he became ill unto death, it was only natural that he prayed. It was his lifestyle. It was the most natural thing in the world. He had been relying on the Lord with his whole heart, so he didn't stop. That would not change just because he got sick, just because a terrible circumstance happened to him, just because things went against him. And so the Lord answered him, gave a sign, and he was healed. As Steve Netness would say, bada boom, just like that. Does that annoy you? That's a little annoying. I'm sorry. It's so simple. He prayed. God heard him. God gave him a sign, and he was healed. That's just, don't you wish it was that easy? Don't you? I mean, we have to be real. That is, sometimes we read these things, and it's hard. And so now we're going to turn to the New Testament, and we'll see what it has to say. And we're going to turn to Matthew 17. And we're going to look at Jesus. Now, Jesus had been up on the mountain with 3 disciples. He had been transformed transfigured so that those 3 disciples saw his glory. And they're up on the mountain, and it's a wonderful thing. And then they come down, and there's chaos. They come down where the other disciples are. So that would be 9 other ones are there. And there's a big crowd. And at the foot of the mountain, a large crowd was waiting for them. A man came and knelt before Jesus and said, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is an epileptic. He has seizures and suffers terribly. He often falls into the fire or into the water. So I brought him to your disciples, but they couldn't heal him. Jesus replied, You faithless and corrupt people, how long must I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring the boy to me. Then Jesus rebuked the demon in the boy, and it left him. From that moment, the boy was well. Afterward, the disciples asked Jesus privately, Why couldn't we cast out the demon? You don't have enough faith, Jesus told them. I tell you the truth, if you had faith even as small as a mustard seed, you could say to this mountain, Move from here to there, and it would move. Nothing would be impossible. Okay. So do you feel like the disciples, they failed at this healing thing, and then Jesus intervenes. He answers the man's prayer, heals instantly. Do you kind of identify with them? It was so simple that the Lord did, and so great, and yet do you think, oh gee, that's too easy. I'm a failure. Why can't I get those results? Okay, this is the hard part. This is the hard part. Let me repeat. You don't have enough faith. I tell you the truth, if you had faith even as small as a mustard seed, and you could say to this mountain, move, you could say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it would move. Nothing would be impossible. I'm sorry, ouch. Really? Like, really? Just have enough faith. It sounds so easy. So what is he saying? What does that mean? We have to look at that. A former member of this congregation, I don't know, some of you remember him, Dell Anderson. You remember Dell? Okay, well, he lived by this maxim, enthusiasm. Enthusiasm. He went around everywhere telling people to have enthusiasm. And the word actually means God in you. That's what it means. And so Dell had a great career. He built it on this principle. He told everything that everybody around him to have enthusiasm, have God in you. Okay, his son fell on hard times. Now, his son testified to this in his service, so this is something that he has said, and he said, I'm telling you, it sounds really great, but I had to move back in with my parents when I fell on hard times and everything went wrong in my life, and I moved in, and he told me every day, go make yourself a good day. And he said it was so annoying. So, Dell did not stop saying that when he had a stroke and he was sitting in a wheelchair. He continued to believe that. He was saying, excel at God daily. Well, I ran into Doug, his son, not too long ago at Ben Franklin when I was having lunch. And I mean, the guy was just so joyful and so thrilled. And his life had turned totally around. And he had concentrated on having faith and on praying and on making that a lifestyle. And as his faith increased, his hard circumstances changed. And he was just joyful and vibrant. That didn't mean he didn't have struggles. But it changed. Faith is a lifestyle. I don't think Jesus was saying this. Live like you want to. Go about your life most of the time just doing what you want to do. And then if something goes wrong, conjure up a whole bunch of faith and try to get help with that particular circumstance. I don't think that's what he's saying. I think it's more like this. He says you don't have enough faith in your larger life. He means faith has to be the mainstream focus of your life. Something that you get up in the morning. When it's mainstream, it means faith in the morning is your lifestyle. It means God is first. God's your first priority. God's the most important thing in your life. God is true faith. It doesn't just show up at crucial times. You know, it'd be like trying to play a football game or something when you never practiced. And so God's faith has to be that daily lifestyle. It's a habit of trusting God, prioritizing God more than anything else in your life. So let's look at the disciples. What were they doing? So right after they left and Jesus had healed that guy, he goes to them, he turns to them, this is very odd, he turns to them and he says, we're going to Jerusalem, I'm going to suffer a lot, and I'm going to be killed, and then I'm going to be raised. And they resisted that. They didn't like that at all. They turned the conversation to this. Who's the greatest? I think I'm the greatest because. I think I'm the greatest because. And so you see, they weren't there. They weren't there, even though they were the disciples with faith as the greatest. And faith, like I said, is a habit. It's a mainstream of your life. It's not a forgotten habit. It is an intentional habit. Now, if you seriously look at your life, which I'm inviting you to do, what are the most important things? Is it your spouse or your family? Is it your job? Is it your boyfriend or girlfriend? Is it where you're going to school? What is it? Where's Jesus in that list? Is he fourth or fifth or sixth, or where is it? Where on the list? Because when you seriously follow Jesus, Jesus is going to be challenging you about where he is on your list. And so when you do that, you're going to have that challenge because he's going to challenge you to say, make me first. Because if I'm first, all those other things, your job, your career, your ministry, your marriage, your children, they're going to begin to fall in line. They're going to begin to work well if he is first. And so then he won't need to say to you, how long do I have to put up with you? And don't we feel that sometimes? God, here I am again. I haven't done so well this week. Do you? You don't have enough faith. I don't want to hear that, right? I don't want to hear. You don't have enough faith. I want to be in that place to have enough faith. And so Jesus says, I tell you the truth, if you had faith even as small as a mustard seed, even as small, then you can move mountains. Nothing would be impossible. So it takes time. Let's look at the disciples. It took them a long time. Okay, they had to go through a lot before they got to the place where they really put themselves into prioritizing Jesus. And then they began experiencing a lot of healing and miracles. If you allow Jesus to be the most important person in your life, the first reality, then even if you're not healed of something physical, there's healing that is just abundant throughout your life. So 52 years ago, a woman named Joni Eareckson Tada, she still looks great, and she's 68. She had an accident at age 18. She dove into a body of water and broke her neck and became a quadriplegic. She had been raised as a Christian, but she hadn't really, she said later, Jesus was not my first priority. But when this accident happened, and sometimes when these things happen, people will be driven away from the Lord. Other times they'll be driven toward the Lord. She was driven toward the Lord. And so she was driven to make God her priority, like Hezekiah. But she decided, and she should have, she decided, I'm going to pray for my paralysis. I want it to be healed. And so she went through a big, long study. She prayed and prayed and prayed, and friends prayed, and she was not healed. And she fell into this huge, terrible, deep depression. And she stayed there for a while. And it was terrible. And then all of a sudden she said, you know what? I'm just going to trust God with this. I'm just going to simply trust him. I'm going to do the best I can to put him first, to pray, and to live by faith. And so she made that decision. And so shortly thereafter, she began a ministry called Joni and Friends. Have anybody ever heard of Joni and Friends? Yeah, many of you. Why? She's quite famous, isn't she? She began that ministry. At this young age, she began speaking at Billy Graham crusades, and he had her at a number of crusades to give her testimony. She began writing books. She has written 40 books, and she continues to write. She has at least 10 honorary degrees. She has she is an artist. She paints with a brush in her mouth. She was taught that very early on in her paralysis. She's a singer. She's a radio host. She has been an advocate for the disabled. She served on the National Council of Disabilities for the United States Congress, which produced the first draft of the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. Even though a quadriplegic, she has changed. She has moved mountains for millions of people. She has made us all aware of the needs of disabled people. Whenever you go and you see a sidewalk that doesn't have a curb, and somebody in a wheelchair can just go right, that goes back to exactly her work. Now, did she do that because she's such a skilled person? Did she do that because she's this magnificent, amazing, well, she is. Why? Because she had faith in God. And she's done more than she could ever imagine. And God needed her to minister to people with handicaps all over the world, and it's impacted the entire world. Now, in recent years, she got breast cancer. Stage 3. That is not a small. Being a breast cancer survivor, that's a reason to be scared. And she went through treatment, and she was cured. And then he came back, and she not only had a return of her breast cancer, but then she began treatment, had complications with her lungs. And that's her husband right there. She got married. And so they began to pray, and they sent out a plea for prayer. And as they prayed, it wasn't easy to go through all this complication, all this lung disease and all that. But last month, she received a notice that says, all clear, no sign of cancer, no sign of lung disease, no sign, the lung disease was kind of related to her handicap and heart trouble. And she got a completely clear bill of health, completely healed. And so she and her husband and the friends of Johnny and friends are just praising God, thanking God that he has healed her. Johnny said to this mountain, move from here to there, and it was done for her. She's done with her life what she could have never imagined. It didn't happen due to money or human skill or her qualities in herself. It happened because of faith. It happened because of faith in the one who can move mountains, who can accomplish the impossible. Now in our story with Jesus, a little boy, or maybe a man, the son of the man who asked for help, that young man with epilepsy walked away from his disease. In Johnny's case, her paralysis didn't go away. But the results just superseded anything she could have ever accomplished without it. So are you struggling with health? Or with a problem? Or with something that overwhelms you and you're not making much progress? And you're kind of stuck in the, what the heck is this faith thing all about anyway? Do you feel like you're just kind of wallowing right there? Listen to Jesus. Make him first priority. Make faith your lifestyle. Check out where Jesus fits in to your life. Try to move him up into first priority. And in everything, pray. In everything, build your faith. Insist on it. When you wake up in the morning and you feel depressed, insist. No, I'm going to have faith. I'm going to pray. And it will affect your life. And it will begin to affect the lives around you. And it will begin to affect your city. And there's a number of people here. And if we all had that attitude, it will make a difference. Because you're involved in places in the city and in your business and in volunteerism and other things. And it will make a difference. It will change your city. It will change your world. Amen.